The Seiko Recraft has lost 16.9% of its value over 5 years. The Seiko SUR336 costs less, and the collector community treats it as one of the best value propositions in watchmaking. Same brand name, same crown logo, completely different outcomes. The difference is not price, it is what Seiko decided each watch was for. 7 references in this catalog that exist to carry the name. 3 that exist to prove something. This video is the difference between those two groups. Watch 1. The Seiko SUR336. Around $180. The Seiko that should not exist at this price. Alright, tell me in the comments what your favorite watch is. I read every single one. And if you're enjoying this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It genuinely helps the channel and I appreciate every one of you who does. The SUR336 runs the caliber 6N52, a standard quartz movement accurate to plus or minus 15 seconds per month, with a battery that requires replacement every 3 years. Not solar, not long-life lithium. 3 years, then a battery service. The case is stainless steel. The crystal is mineral glass. The water resistance is 50 meters on most configurations. These are specifications you find on unbranded fashion watches sold at airport gift shops for $60. The specific problem with the SUR336 is not that it is a poor watch. It is that Seiko produces, under the same brand name, the caliber 0100, a movement accurate to 1 second per year, solar-powered, available in a watch that costs 35 times more, but demonstrates what Seiko is actually capable of when it commits its engineering to a reference. Buying the SUR336 is buying the name without the technology. At $285, just $105 more than the SUR336, the Seiko 5 Sports SRPD55 is available. A genuine in-house automatic movement, hacking, hand winding, and 100-meter water resistance. For $105 more, the case for the SUR336 collapses entirely. There is no argument for the SUR336 that does not collapse the moment you consider what the same amount of money buys elsewhere in the Seiko catalog. The watch exists to put the Seiko name on a wrist at the lowest possible price. It succeeds at that. It succeeds at nothing else. The SUR336 exists because the name sells. The next watch is more insidious. It looks like a serious automatic and charges for the aesthetic of one. Watch 2. The Seiko Recraft SNKN01, around $200. The watch that looks like progress and delivers 1996. The Recraft series is Seiko's vintage-inspired collection. Cushion cases, domed crystals, sunray dials that reference the golden era of Japanese watchmaking in the 1960s and 1970s. The SNKN01 specifically presents this aesthetic convincingly. The case shape is genuinely attractive. The dial is clean. The watch looks, on first examination, like a thoughtful entry into the vintage-inspired market that has driven significant enthusiasm and secondary market performance for references from Grand Seiko, Longines, and Tudor. The movement is the problem. The SNKN01 runs the caliber 7S26, a movement Seiko has been producing for over 25 years that lacks 2 functions every serious automatic watch has offered since the 1970s: hacking seconds and hand winding. No hacking means you cannot stop the seconds hand to set the time precisely. No hand winding means if the watch runs down, you must wear it or shake it for hours before it runs properly again. Watch Charts documents the Recraft series with a risk score of 78 out of 100, extreme risk category, and a 5-year secondary market decline of 16.9%. The watch that looks like the vintage era is powered by a movement that cannot perform the basic functions that watches of the actual vintage era performed. At $200, the SRPD55 above this watch delivers the 4R36 with both hacking and hand winding for less money. The SNKN01 charges a vintage aesthetic premium for a movement that does not deserve one. The collector who buys the SNKN01 because it looks like the serious vintage Seikos of the 1960s is buying the case without the contents. The serious vintage Seikos of the 1960s contained movements that won international chronometry competitions. The SNKN01 contains a movement that cannot stop its own seconds hand. The Recraft charges a vintage premium for a movement that predates the era it references. The next watch charges a solar premium for a watch the community has collectively decided to ignore. Watch 3. The Seiko Coutura SNE538, around $400. The watch that the Seiko community has collectively decided not to discuss. The Seiko Coutura is the brand's solar-powered dress watch line. Larger cases, refined aesthetics, aimed at the buyer who wants a premium Seiko appearance without mechanical complexity. The SNE538 uses Seiko's own solar technology, legitimate solar charging that eliminates battery replacement, a genuine engineering achievement, in a 45mm stainless steel case with a sunray dial and day-date complication. The construction quality is to Seiko's standard. The movement technology is not the problem. The problem is relevance. Watch Charts records fewer than 5 active Coutura listings with sufficient transaction history to generate meaningful secondary market analysis. The collection generates no community discussion on watch you seek, no sustained review coverage in the enthusiast press, and no secondary market momentum in any direction. It does not depreciate spectacularly. It simply does not exist in the conversation that watch collectors have about Seiko. At $400, the Seiko Prospex Turtle SRPE93 delivers ISO 6425 certified 200-meter water resistance, a sapphire crystal, an iconic case design with 50 years of community history, and a movement that the collector community respects. The Coutura delivers solar charging and silence. In a catalog as rich as Seiko's, silence at this price is the harshest possible verdict. The buyer who purchases the SNE538 because they want a solar-powered Seiko dress watch has found the wrong reference. The Seiko Presage collection above it delivers more visual interest, better movement specifications, and active community engagement at similar prices. The Coutura exists in a gap between those better options and does not fill it convincingly. The Coutura is the watch nobody discusses. The next reference was once the watch everyone wanted, and has been quietly made obsolete by its own catalog. Watch 4. The Seiko Prospex Samurai SRPB51, around $525. The watch that was once the answer and has been passed by its own brand. The Seiko Samurai has a legitimate history. The original Samurai SBDA001 from 2004 introduced a distinctive angular case, sharp lugs, faceted flanks, a design that referenced the angular aesthetics of Japanese sword furniture, and produced one of the most recognizable Seiko diver profiles ever made. The current SRPB51 maintains that case design with a ceramic bezel insert in most configurations and the caliber 4R35 movement. The movement is the specific failure. The 4R35 delivers accuracy of +45 to -35 seconds per day, an extraordinarily wide tolerance for a watch at this price. The COSC chronometer standard that Rolex and Omega use to certify their movements requires accuracy within -4 to +6 seconds per day. The Seiko Sumo SPB323, available at approximately $600 to $700, delivers the 6R35 with 10 to 15 seconds per day real-world accuracy and 30 additional hours of power reserve. The Seiko Turtle SRPE93, available at $525, delivers the same price point as the Samurai with ISO 6425 certification and sapphire crystal. The Samurai asks a premium over the Turtle for a case design that has not been fundamentally updated since 2004, powered by a movement that Seiko themselves have superseded at lower price points. Buy what surrounds it in the catalog, not the Samurai itself. The community's current recommendation when someone asks about the Samurai is consistent and immediate. At this price, the Sumo or the Turtle are the correct answers. Both have been made by Seiko for longer. Both are more refined in their respective categories, and both carry movements that the Samurai's price implies, but its specifications do not deliver. The Samurai is a good case design around a movement it does not deserve. The next watch is the opposite problem. A great dial around specs that the price does not justify. Watch 5. The Seiko Presage Cocktail Time SUR336, around $450. The most beautiful watch on this list, also the most misunderstood. The Cocktail Time is a genuinely extraordinary dial. The SUR336 specifically features a gradient dial, shifting color as the viewing angle changes in a way that no photograph fully captures and that no competitor at this price from any manufacturer matches. It is a beautiful object by any standard applied to watches at $450. The community has agreed on this verdict for over a decade. The compromises require honest disclosure. The SUR336 uses Hardlex crystal, Seiko's proprietary hardened mineral glass, rather than sapphire. Hardlex scratches more readily than sapphire and cannot be polished out when it does. The water resistance is 50 meters, adequate for hand washing and rain, insufficient for swimming or beach use. The movement is the 4R35, the same caliber that disqualifies the Samurai above it, delivering 41 hours of power reserve at the same accuracy tolerance. At $450 for a dress watch with Hardlex crystal, 50-meter water resistance, and a 4R35 caliber, the Cocktail Time is asking you to pay for the dial and nothing else. If you understand that and want the most visually extraordinary Seiko dress watch under $500, buy it knowing exactly what you are receiving. If you want mechanical quality to match the visual quality, the 3 watches at the end of this list deliver that alignment. The specific experience that Cocktail Time buyers describe consistently: they purchased it for the dial, wore it for a week, and began researching what Seiko produces above it. The dial converts buyers. The movement reveals the limitations. That is the specific sequence this watch produces. The Cocktail Time will convert you to Seiko and then show you its limits within the same week. The next reference at $525 makes the same compromise and charges more for the privilege of discovering it. Watch 6. The Seiko Presage Style 60s SUR336, around $525. The vintage aesthetic at modern prices, with a movement that the actual vintage era would have rejected. The SUR336 is part of Seiko's Style 60s collection, referencing the dress watches Seiko produced in the 1960s for the domestic Japanese market. The applied indices, the slim case profile, the textured dial, these design elements reference that era accurately and produce a watch that reads as genuinely vintage-inspired rather than derivative. At $525, it sits at the top of the Presage collection's accessible tier and communicates an ambition that the movement inside does not fulfill. The caliber 4R35 is the movement inside the SUR336, the same movement inside the Samurai at number 4 and the Cocktail Time at number 5. 3 different watches with 3 different design philosophies, all sharing the same movement tolerance, plus 45 to minus 35 seconds per day, 41 hours of power reserve, Hardlex crystal. The Style 60s aesthetic charges a vintage premium. The watch looks like it should contain a movement from an era when Seiko was winning international chronometry competitions. The movement inside it would have failed those competitions. At the same $525 price point, the Hamilton Intramatic chronograph runs the ETA Valjoux 7753, a proven column wheel automatic chronograph movement in a 40mm vintage-inspired case that the collector community consistently rates above the SUR336 for both movement quality and finishing. The SUR336 is the correct answer if the brief is specifically Seiko and specifically vintage. If the brief is vintage dress watch at $500, the alternatives are more compelling. If the budget can stretch to $1,500, the King Seiko SPB287, Zaratsu polished, 6R31, genuine connection to the 1965 King Seiko chronometry tradition, is the reference that delivers the argument the SUR336 makes visually, but cannot support mechanically. The Style 60s charges for nostalgia without the movement that earned it. The next watch has the right idea and the wrong components, the most frustrating combination in the Seiko catalog. Watch 7. The Seiko 5 Sports GMT SSK005, around $420. The best idea Seiko has put into a watch at this price, executed with the wrong components. The GMT complication, tracking a second time zone simultaneously, is a function that Swiss manufacturers charge $1,500 minimum to deliver from a legitimate manufacturer. Tudor's Black Bay GMT retails at $4,975. Seiko charges $420. At that price differential, the SSK005 would appear to be one of the strongest value propositions in the watch market. The specifications reveal the limitation. The Caliber 4 R34 delivers the GMT function accurately, but achieves it within the same accuracy tolerance as every other 4R family movement, plus 45 to minus 35 seconds per day. The crystal is mineral glass, not Hardlex mineral, on a watch retailing above $400 in 2026. A GMT watch that loses or gains up to 80 seconds per day compounds the accuracy problem in a specific way. The entire movement drifts, which means both the local time and the home time are simultaneously wrong. The functional promise of a GMT, knowing what time it is in two places simultaneously, requires a baseline of accuracy that the 4R34 does not deliver. The functional compromise of a low-accuracy GMT is greater than the functional compromise of a low-accuracy three-hand watch. The SSK005 is the correct GMT for a buyer who understands these limitations and needs a GMT function at this price with no alternative available. For everyone else, the better answer is to save additional money and reach a movement with the accuracy specifications that a GMT complication deserves. The SSK005 is not a bad watch. It is a watch that asks you to accept a functional compromise at a price where the compromise feels unnecessary. A GMT that drifts significantly defeats part of its own purpose. A watch that tracks two time zones inaccurately is tracking neither time zone correctly. 7 watches built to sell something. The 3 that follow were built to prove something. The first of the 3 proves it at $285, which is the most uncomfortable fact in this entire video for anyone who spent more than that on any of the references above. Watch 8. The Seiko 5 Sports SUR336, around $285. The watch that the collector community recommends to every person who asks where to start with mechanical watches, regardless of budget. The SUR336 runs the Caliber 4 R36, a fully in-house Seiko automatic movement with hacking seconds and hand-winding capability, produced and regulated entirely by Seiko. At $285, this combination is essentially unmatched in the watch market. Swiss brands at this price point are selling quartz movements or entry automatics sourced from external suppliers. Seiko is selling a manufacture movement in a 100-meter water-resistant case with a rotating timing bezel, day-date complication, and exhibition caseback. The specific comparison that places the SUR336's achievement in context: the ETA Valjoux 7753 that powers the Tissot T-Race chronograph, one of the most recommended Swiss automatic chronographs under $1,000, is a movement sourced from an external supplier that Tissot purchases and installs. The 4R36 in the SUR336 is designed, produced, regulated, and serviced entirely by Seiko. Vertical integration at this scale, at this price, is not available from any Swiss manufacturer at a comparable price point. Swiss watchmaking's entry-level automatic is borrowed technology. Seiko's entry-level automatic is their own. The community's verdict on the SUR336 has been consistent for 6 consecutive years. If you are buying your first mechanical watch, start here. Nothing in the market at this price delivers comparable specifications from a vertically integrated manufacturer with Seiko's service network and global parts availability. The SUR336 is not on this list as the best cheap watch. It is here because it is one of the best watches available at any price relative to what it costs. The 7-year-old who receives this watch as a birthday present will still be wearing it in their 20s and describing it as the watch that taught them what mechanical watchmaking is. That is not an exaggeration. It is the specific life cycle that SUR336 ownership produces more consistently than almost any other reference at any price. The 7 references above it in this video charge more and deliver less per dollar than the SUR336 delivers at $285. That is the specific achievement this watch represents. The SUR336 is the best watch at its price. The next reference is the best watch at its price and carries 66 years of heritage that makes every other watch in the catalog look like a newcomer. Watch 9. The Seiko Prospex Alpinist SPB121. Around $750. The cult classic. The watch that experts keep coming back to. The Seiko that watch journalists name when asked what the brand does best. The Alpinist traces its lineage to 1959, when Seiko developed a field and climbing watch for the Japanese Alpine Club's Himalayan expeditions. The SPB121 carries that heritage in a 40mm stainless steel case with the 6R35 caliber, 70 hours of power reserve, plus or minus 10 to 15 seconds per day in real-world wear, sapphire crystals on both front and back. The green sunburst dial shifts between deep emerald and olive as light changes. The inner rotating compass bezel is calibrated for actual magnetic north navigation. Functional, not decorative. $350 more than the SUR336 for a movement that is genuinely superior in every measurable specification. The specific comparison the community makes most frequently when discussing the Alpinist: the IWC Pilot's Watch Automatic at approximately $5,000. Both are field watches with heritage connections to precision timekeeping in demanding environments. The IWC delivers Swiss manufacturer Prestige, a recognizable brand name, and a movement that the Swiss certification system endorses. The Alpinist delivers an in-house Seiko movement with better daily accuracy specifications, a functional compass, and a heritage that is older and more directly connected to actual mountain use than most Swiss field watches can document. At $750 against $5,000, the Alpinist makes the comparison uncomfortable for anyone who evaluates field watches by what they actually do. GQ, Watch You Seek, Authentic Wrist, and the enthusiast community broadly have named the Alpinist the strongest value in the Seiko Prospex lineup for 3 consecutive years running. The watch that has been in production in some form since 1959, without the community losing interest in it, is not popular because of marketing. A watch discontinued and revived because its absence generated sustained demand is not popular by accident. The Alpinist is popular because the combination of heritage, functionality, movement quality, and price is correct at $750 in a way that almost nothing else in the watch market achieves. The watch was discontinued and brought back because the community refused to stop asking for it. That is not a marketing achievement. It is a quality achievement. The specific acknowledgement from buyers who had already moved on that they wanted to come back. The Alpinist is the expert's choice at $750. The final reference is the expert's choice when the question becomes, what is the best Seiko ever made, regardless of price? Watch 10. The Seiko Prospex Marine Master SJX003. Around $3,500. The watch that made Swiss watchmakers pay attention. The Seiko that exists not to compete with its own catalog, but to demonstrate what Japanese watchmaking can do when cost is not the primary constraint. The SJX003 designation, a Japan domestic reference number rather than the international code Seiko uses for export models, signals immediately that this watch was designed without concession to the preferences of buyers who have not sought it out deliberately. The monoblock case in polished and brushed stainless steel applies alternating surface treatments at transitions that the collector community describes as approaching Grand Seiko's Zaratsu standard. 300 meters of ISO 6425 professional certification. Ceramic bezel insert. A case architecture developed for saturation diving operations where failure at depth is not recoverable. Here is the specific data point that makes the Marine Master conversation impossible for Swiss dive watch manufacturers to engage with directly. The Rolex Submariner date retails at approximately $11,350. It carries the caliber 3235, certified to -2+2 seconds per day, in a case that Rolex's machine-assisted polishing process finishes to a standard the community describes as excellent by production watch standards. The Marine Master SJX SUR336 retails at $3,500. It carries the caliber 8L35, hand-assembled by watchmakers who also produce Grand Seiko movements, in a case that Seiko's hand polishing process finishes to a standard that the same community describes as competitive, with Zaratsu polished Grand Seiko references. The Rolex costs 3 times more. The collector community's consensus on which watch is the more impressive physical object is not unanimous. That absence of consensus, at a price ratio of 1:3, is the most remarkable fact about the Marine Master. The caliber 8L35 inside the SJX SUR336 is assembled by hand at Seiko's Shizukuishi Watch Studio, the same facility that produces Grand Seiko movements, by watchmakers whose individual regulation work regularly achieves ±10 seconds per day in a movement rated for wider tolerances. The 8L35 shares its fundamental architecture and production location with Grand Seiko calibers that appear in watches retailing above $6,000. The SJX SUR336 retails at $3,500. The watch press verdict on the Marine Master SJX SUR336 is the most consistent in the category. This is one of the most compelling mechanical dive watches available at any price from any manufacturer. Not at its price tier, at any price. The collectors who own both the Marine Master and a Rolex Submariner describe the comparison the same way every time. The Submariner communicates more to the outside world. The Marine Master communicates more to the person wearing it. Both statements are true. The Marine Master buyer who understands this before purchasing is making the correct choice for their specific priorities. The pattern that connects the 3 correct watches on this list is the same. Each one sacrifices presentation for capability. The SRPD55 has a simple design and an extraordinary movement for the price. The Alpinist has a modest profile and a 6R35 with 70 hours of power reserve. The Marine Master has a Japan domestic reference number and hand assembly at a facility that produces Grand Seiko. The 7 incorrect watches do the reverse. They sacrifice capability for presentation. That distinction, once understood, applies to the entire watch market, not just Seiko. The difference between the 2 groups is not price. The SRPD55 costs $285 and belongs in the group that deserves your attention. The difference is what Seiko decided each watch was for. The 3 references at the end of this video were built to prove something. The 7 before them were built to sell something. Now you know which is which. Thank you so much for watching this video all the way to the end. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, drop a like and let me know your thoughts in the comments. And I'd genuinely love to hear what kind of topics you'd like to see next, so leave that in the comments too. I read every single one.